The chandeliers sparkled like diamonds above the grand ballroom, their golden light reflecting off crystal glasses and silverware arranged with military precision. The air buzzed with the chatter of high society. Business magnates, politicians, and socialites all gathered to celebrate what was rumored to be the most extravagant wedding of the season. Victoria Hayes, in contrast, seemed out of place. She wore a modest navy blue dress, decades old but carefully pressed, her hair pinned neatly with no trace of luxury. While the other women flaunted designer gowns and glittering jewels, Victoria carried herself with quiet dignity, though her posture betrayed the weight of being both judged and dismissed. She walked slowly, deliberately keeping to the edges of the room, her presence as understated as the faint fragrance of her perfume. When Serena, radiant in a custom couture gown, spotted her mother-in-law, her smile stiffened. With the grace of a practiced socialite, she linked arms with Adam and led him toward her parents, Walter and Sylvia Reynolds. Then, turning to them with a performative sweetness, she said, "This is Victoria Hayes, Adam's mother. She prefers to live, simply. But don't mind her. She's always been the family's little embarrassment." The words sliced through the air, cloaked in a laugh that only deepened the sting. Adam stiffened but said nothing, torn between loyalty to his new bride and the discomfort in his mother's eyes. Sylvia Reynolds raised a polite smile, the kind that barely touched her lips. But Walter did not smile at all. His gaze had locked onto Victoria the instant she stepped forward. For a moment, the ballroom seemed to shrink, the sounds of champagne toasts and string music fading into silence. Walter's face paled. His fingers tightened around the stem of his glass as if to steady himself. The woman before him, the one Serena had so cruelly dismissed, was no ordinary guest. In her calm, watchful eyes, Walter recognized something that struck him like a blow. Victoria Hayes was the silent force who had orchestrated the buyout of Reynolds Holdings 3 years earlier. She was the faceless investor whose signature had sealed away the empire he once commanded. And now, here she stood disguised as the modest mother of the groom, quietly holding the power to unravel everything. Thomas Hayes had been more than a husband to Victoria. He was her partner in every sense of the word. A quiet genius with an engineer's mind and a dreamer's heart, Thomas spent years in a modest workshop tinkering with designs that most dismissed as impossible. Friends and colleagues often shook their heads when he spoke of a battery that could outlast anything on the market, charging faster, holding power longer, and reshaping the future of mobile technology. But Thomas was not deterred. He worked late into the night, his desk littered with circuit boards and half-written notes, his hands smudged with graphite and grease. Victoria remembered those nights vividly, making tea for him at midnight, listening to his frustrations, and encouraging him when failure seemed certain. Then one evening, with a small spark and a triumphant smile, he proved them all wrong. His breakthrough design changed the course of their lives forever. The invention brought in contracts worth hundreds of millions. Investors lined up. Multinational corporations scrambled for licensing rights. Overnight, Thomas and Victoria found themselves swept into a world of unimaginable wealth. Yet, unlike others who might flaunt such fortune, they chose discretion. When Thomas passed away unexpectedly, Victoria was left with not only grief, but also the staggering responsibility of safeguarding the empire they had built. She made a deliberate choice. Adam would not grow up as an heir weighed down by privilege. Instead, she and Thomas had agreed long ago that their son should believe they lived comfortably. No more, no less. Victoria lived that promise with absolute discipline. She drove an older car, lived in a modest apartment, and never indulged in displays of affluence. She invested quietly, with precision and foresight, turning millions into hundreds of millions. And always, she kept the truth hidden from Adam, convinced that shielding him from wealth would give him the freedom to build his own identity. Now, 15 years later, her fortune exceeded $700 million. Among her holdings was Reynolds Holdings, the crown jewel she had acquired in silence after Walter Reynolds' fall from grace. On paper, she was just another investor hidden behind a web of trusts and corporations. In reality, she was a financial titan disguised as an ordinary widow. It was a secret that had protected her family. But secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of surfacing, especially when greed enters the picture. The restaurant Serena chose was not just any place. It was the kind of establishment where waiters spoke in hushed tones. Chandeliers cast a flattering glow, and each glass of wine cost more than a week's groceries. Victoria, in her modest attire, felt the contrast as soon as she entered. Serena, however, was perfectly at home here. She greeted the maitre d' by name and swept across the room with practiced elegance, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to an ambush. The table was set by the window overlooking the city skyline. The view was dazzling, but the air between the two women quickly grew heavy. Serena ordered a vintage red without asking Victoria's preference, her smile polished but insincere. "Mother Hayes," she began, her tone syrupy yet edged with calculation. "You've always been so private. I admire that. But surely, for family's sake, we should be more transparent with one another." Victoria gave a polite smile, masking her instinct to recoil. "Transparency is important," she replied evenly, "but so is respect." Serena ignored the subtle warning. Instead, she leaned forward, lowering her voice as though sharing a secret. "You see, I have a deep interest in corporate finance. My father taught me everything about balance sheets, acquisitions, and leveraged takeovers." Her eyes glittered as she spoke the last words, testing Victoria's reaction. Then, with the precision of a surgeon, she pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a blurred photograph. A dimly lit conference room, a crowd of executives, and among them, a faint silhouette, a woman with Victoria's unmistakable posture and profile. Serena's voice dropped to a whisper. "This was taken at the Reynolds Holdings buyout meeting 3 years ago. Tell me, Victoria, what business did you have being there?" For a split second, Victoria's chest tightened. The photo was grainy, but the resemblance was undeniable. Still, her face remained calm, her years of discipline cloaking every flicker of panic. She lifted her wine glass slowly, meeting Serena's gaze without blinking. "That could be anyone," she said softly. "People often see what they want to see." But beneath the calm exterior, Victoria's mind was racing. How far had Serena gone? What else did she know? Across town, Adam was pacing his office. Serena had mentioned over breakfast that she wanted to get to know his mother better, but Adam sensed an ulterior motive. When he heard fragments of her conversation later, her pointed questions about Victoria's past, her obsession with the Reynolds name, his unease deepened. He began to wonder if his wife's curiosity about family history was not born of affection, but of calculation. For the first time, Adam found himself torn, caught between the woman he loved and the mother he barely understood. And Serena, with her polished smile and probing questions, was determined to drive that wedge deeper. Michael Sullivan was the kind of man who thrived in shadows. A financial advisor with a reputation for unearthing secrets buried beneath polished balance sheets, he had worked with Victoria for years. She trusted him because he had no loyalty to wealth or prestige, only to truth, numbers, and her. The two met in her apartment late one evening. The blinds were drawn, the city lights flickering in the distance, and a stack of manila folders lay on the table between them. Michael adjusted his glasses, his expression grave. "I've gone through every record I could find," he began, opening the first folder. "The Reynoldses are hanging on by threads. Their entire lifestyle is financed by credit." He slid a document toward Victoria. "Mortgage statements. Loan agreements. The numbers were damning. They've mortgaged 80% of their mansion's value. The cars, the vacations, the dinners at five-star restaurants, all borrowed time. Walter's mismanagement gutted Reynolds Holdings long before you acquired it. Selling was his only option, and now? The family is propped up by debt." Victoria skimmed the papers, her face unreadable. She had suspected decay, but the scale of recklessness surprised even her. Michael's tone grew sharper. "Here's the irony. Walter's only stable income today comes from consulting contracts funneled to him by the new Reynolds Holdings management. In other words, he survives because you allow him to." For a moment, silence stretched across the room. Victoria tapped her fingers lightly on the folder, the weight of truth settling in. Walter Reynolds, who had once mocked her, who had let his daughter belittle her as the family's disgrace, was now a man living off her generosity without even realizing it. But Michael wasn't finished. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There's something else. Serena." Victoria's eyes flicked up, sharp and focused. "She's not as naive as she pretends. I have reliable confirmation that she's hired a private investigator. She's digging, and she's determined to uncover whatever she can about you. Your assets, your past, the Reynolds takeover. She suspects far more than she lets on." Victoria exhaled slowly, folding her hands in her lap. The pieces were moving faster now. Serena's lunch invitation, the blurred photograph, Adam's unease, all threads of the same net tightening around her. But unlike the Reynoldses, Victoria had never lived in denial. She thrived in reality, and reality told her this: a storm was coming. She closed the folder calmly and looked at Michael. Then let her dig. The deeper she goes, the more dangerous the ground beneath her feet will become. Adam and Serena arrived at Victoria's apartment on a crisp Saturday morning. Serena wore a flawless designer suit, her hair pulled back in perfect symmetry, exuding confidence. Adam, however, seemed uneasy, his eyes darting nervously as if sensing a hidden current beneath the polished surface of their visit. "Mother," Serena began with a polished smile, "Adam and I have been thinking about the future. A future that involves family unity, shared purpose, and trust." She slid a folder across the mahogany table, its leather-bound cover gleaming. Inside lay a meticulously drafted business plan titled Hayes Reynolds Family Fund, a vision for generational wealth. The proposal outlined the creation of a $50 million fund, to be co-managed by Adam, Serena, and Victoria herself. On paper, it appeared noble, an intergenerational partnership to preserve wealth, diversify investments, and support philanthropic projects. Yet buried deep in the fine print was the unmistakable truth: Serena and Adam would hold operational control. Victoria, though technically the financier, would be reduced to a silent partner. Victoria read it carefully, page by page, her face an unreadable mask. When she finally closed the folder, she smiled, not with warmth, but with a sharp, knowing curve of her lips. "I see," she said softly. "A partnership. A family fund." She let the words linger like smoke in the air. Adam shifted in his seat. "It's just an idea, Mother. Serena thought it could bring us closer together, professionally and personally." Victoria interrupted, her eyes fixed directly on Serena. "Tell me, Serena, do you love Adam for who he is? Or for what you think marrying him will bring you?" The room fell into silence. Serena's smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "Of course I love your son. What kind of question is that?" Victoria leaned back, pressing a button on the small remote by her side. Instantly, a recording played from the hidden speakers in the room. Serena's voice echoed, sharp and calculating. "I need a husband with financial stability. Someone who isn't reckless. Someone tied to money in ways that guarantee security. Adam Hayes fits perfectly. His background, his mother's resources, his future." Adam's face went pale. "Serena, you said..." But Victoria wasn't finished. She slid another folder across the table. This one marked confidential reports. Inside were documents from the private investigator Serena had hired. Financial background checks, asset tracking spreadsheets, even surveillance photos of Victoria's movements. There were also transcripts of Serena's consultations with high-profile attorneys specializing in asset disputes and inheritance claims. "I hired my own investigator," Victoria said evenly. "And what he uncovered was enlightening. While you were probing into my past, Serena, I was uncovering your future plans. Legal strategies to challenge Adam's inheritance. Notes on how to secure joint control over assets. And this," she tapped the audio recorder, "is the most damning of all." Adam sat frozen, caught between betrayal and disbelief. Serena's composure cracked for the first time, her voice trembling. This is taken out of context. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Victoria cut her off, her tone now razor-sharp. "You've mistaken my silence for weakness. You've mistaken my discretion for ignorance. But let me be clear. I did not build and protect this fortune to hand it over to someone who views marriage as a financial transaction." The air was thick with tension. Adam buried his face in his hands, while Serena's eyes flickered with desperation. For the first time, the balance of power in the room was undeniable. The game Serena thought she was playing had shifted entirely. Victoria wasn't just the quiet widow in modest clothes. She was the strategist, the protector, the woman holding every card in her hand. The turning point had come. The silence after Victoria's revelation hung like a heavy curtain in the room. Serena sat rigid, her eyes darting between Adam and his mother, desperately seeking a foothold. Adam, however, looked hollow, as if something fundamental inside him had cracked. Victoria rose from her chair, moved to her desk, and retrieved a thick envelope. With deliberate precision, she spread its contents across the table: bank records, mortgage contracts, and court notices tied to the Reynolds family. The evidence was irrefutable. "Adam," she said gently but firmly, "your wife did not just come into this marriage with hopes and dreams. She came with debts. Massive debts. Walter Reynolds has mortgaged almost everything they own. Their fortune is smoke and mirrors, held together by loans and lies. And Serena saw you not as a partner, but as a lifeline." Adam stared at the documents, his hands trembling. The numbers leapt off the page: millions in outstanding loans, properties leveraged to the brink of foreclosure. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Serena, is this true?" Serena's face hardened. Her charm was gone, her mask stripped away. "What if it is?" she said coldly. "You think love pays the bills? My family built its empire on appearances. When your mother snatched Reynolds' holdings out from under us, she left us with nothing but scraps. I did what I had to do for survival. And marrying you was the smartest move I could make." The words landed like daggers. Adam staggered back, betrayal cutting deeper than he could bear. He grabbed his coat and keys without another word, his voice hoarse. "I need time. I can't stay here tonight." The sound of the door closing behind him echoed through the apartment, leaving only Victoria and Serena in the suffocating silence. Victoria studied her daughter-in-law with a calm, steely gaze. "You've made a grave mistake, Serena. You thought you were marrying into weakness. What you failed to understand is that Adam's independence was a gift I gave him. A choice, but now you've forced my hand." Serena's lips curled in defiance. "And what do you plan to do? Strip me of my marriage, my rights?" "The law doesn't bend to your wealth, Victoria. I've already spoken to lawyers. If Adam files for separation, you'll see me in court. I'll make sure I get what I deserve." Victoria's eyes narrowed, her voice lowering to a razor-edged whisper. "Then so be it. You want war? You'll have it. But know this. I've spent 15 years guarding a secret that was meant to protect my son's freedom. Now, because of you, I will use it as my weapon. You have no idea the strength of the enemy you've chosen." For the first time, a flicker of unease passed through Serena's confident mask. That night, alone in her quiet apartment, Victoria stood by the window overlooking the city lights. The life she had built in silence was about to be dragged into the open. The fortune she had hidden to preserve her son's independence had become the very reason his marriage was collapsing. But there was no more room for restraint. The battle had been declared, and Victoria Hayes never entered a fight she could not win.